Risk management is extremely important to the outdoor industry. As most of us know, risk management has a lot to do with sustainability of the industry. It has to do with whether we'll be able to buy insurance products, whether businesses will be able to perpetuate themselves. We've tried to take 5 or 6 of the most important topics for commercial recreation outfitters, operators, guides, and reduce them into small manageable topics. And those are what we're going to be talking about today. These are probably the most important current issues that the industry is facing. The first topic that we're going to talk about regards one of the more critical risk management topics that we're going to deal with: how we respond to critical incidents, when accidents happen, how we treat guests, participants, employees, things like that. Those issues produce very large and very critical liabilities for recreation operators. We are also going to talk about the content and substance of safety briefings and orienting clients to the activity that you're going to be conducting, and whether we do that properly or not impacts liabilities. The third topic that we're going to talk about regards commercial operators serving minor clients, special considerations that they have to take into account with minors, special issues related to using release and waiver documents. So it is a very important risk management topic. We are also going to talk about marketing and how commercial operators and recreation tour providers generate their marketing can actually produce a fair amount of liability for them. So it's a really important risk management topic. Then one of the last topics that we're going to deal with regards employment-related issues as they impact recreational operators and their staff. After having litigated these cases for a number of years, I've kind of boiled down in my mind the most critical things that are impacting liability for commercial recreation operators. So here we go. We're going to talk about post-incident and accident issues and what we want you to understand to assist in avoiding additional liabilities. What I want you to think about in terms of incidents is how you respond to an incident is going to have a lot to do with whether you get sued or whether you don't get sued, right? Negligence is failing to do what a reasonably prudent person would do under same or similar circumstances, right? And the incidents or the issues where you have to take some action to respond are the situations where whatever is happening is foreseeable, right? You don't have to respond to things or figure out responses to things where you could never foresee them. These are things that you can see coming or you knew or should have known. You know, one of the things that we always say with recreation, with adventure sports, with the type of products that you folks deliver is it's absolutely foreseeable that somebody could get hurt out there, right? Either your employees or one of your participants. I mean, not everything goes perfectly every day. And we wish it did, but it doesn't. And since incidents, accidents are foreseeable, then we have some responsibility to be prepared to address them. And the way that we prepare ourselves is to minimize and mitigate. You do not have a responsibility to stop all incidents. You can't do that. This isn't strict liability. What you have a responsibility to do is minimize and mitigate the potential situations that could produce injury, right? So since it's foreseeable that something could happen out there in the field, that somebody could get injured, you have to have a response plan in place. You have to have thought out what is going to go on when somebody gets injured, when we have to respond. And one of the things that you really have to be keenly aware of is how you are acting when something goes wrong. If somebody feels like you weren't able to respond, you hadn't thought the situation through, you have no way to extricate them, or God forbid you ignore them once something happens, or you don't follow up with them or something like that, then a bad feeling starts. Bad feelings people who were left in fear for a long period of time, people who got humiliated because they didn't get the product that they thought they were going to get, or they got themselves into a situation where, they really didn't want to be out there and they got humiliated, or they felt like you just didn't take care of them in any way. Those types of negative feelings, fear, humiliation, anger, drive retribution. Understand something also, the more serious the incident, the more elevated your response. So as you go through thinking about, how are you going to respond to an incident, you have to have heightened additional preparedness if your situation, if the risks that they're encountering are more severe, or for instance, you're further out in the field, right? The closer you are to advanced medical, the faster your response is. You might be doing something that really doesn't produce all that an extreme set of risk, but if you're in a remote situation, the risks really are elevated, right? Because you're not close to advanced medical care. One of the best ways that we minimize, mitigate, is having an emergency response plan. And I can tell you that the place where you guys get hung up the most is how much detail do you commit to these things? How many words you put on the pages, how many pages should they be? Here's what's more important to me. You have to involve your full staff. The guy who now owns the company but doesn't really go out in the field isn't necessarily the best person to be sitting around thinking about what's really going to happen when something occurs out there. So all levels of the operation have to be sitting at the table, having the discussion when we create these response plans. You have to have in your mind who's going to deliver the various aspects of the response plan. Who's at base of operations, who's going to respond to public land administrators, who's going to be the first responder. You have to think through the various levels. And again, if you are being a reasonably prudent operator, you will have sat down and thought about the foreseeable situation of, an injurious or deadly episode happening on your watch, and you will have written down, how do we respond to a situation like that? But what that writing is then, is it represents what you think a reasonably prudent operator should do. So if you deviate from it, right, that's sort of the proof of your negligence at that point. So take broad strokes with this. And then my other piece of advice about those ops plans, those response plans, practice them. It's all well and good to sit down there and create your little whatever, but if you can't actually bring it to bear, if you can't actually produce it when the incident happens, you're veering close to a more elevated style of negligence. So you need to clearly identify who responds to what. Company owners respond to the media. Guides, people who are out in the field, lesser personnel do not respond to media. It's just a chain of command thing. It's the person who really has ownership of it. It speaks to the seriousness of your response that you actually have an owner do it. If you don't know how to respond to the media, get a little media statement drafted by council, give it to everybody. First aid, rescue, evacuation services is my in-the-field woofer EMT guy capable of responding to this. Can they document, whatever it is you're using, if you're using soap notes or you're using whatever, can you actually document that they're making a good assessment of whether this guy needs to get out or whether he doesn't need to get out and why? At this point, we're not concerned about costs. We're concerned about an actual response to the incident. Have you talked about in your response plans body recovery? Have you actually talked to your staff about what happens when you really have a severe critical incident? And I know that sounds kind of distasteful, but if you have the potential to produce that kind of injury, have you really had that conversation as part of your guide training or that thought process with your response plan? What is your method for getting in contact with base of operations? How is it that you call in or notify somebody when something happens? Now, I know that there are going to be some of you who are actually operating remotely, and you might have multi-days, or you might have, places where you're really out of contact or you're not in cell range. And that's okay, it's fine to produce those kind of products, but it means you have an additional set of warnings to give to your clients, because in this day and age where we're streaming live 24/7, people like me have mild panic attacks if you get too far away from the BlackBerry. People's expectation, I can guarantee you, is that you have some way to communicate. And everybody knows about the world of satellite phones, and there will be, if you're not out there with a way to communicate, your clients need to know about it so that they can assume that risk. You need to say, hey, the product that we're delivering or the experience that we're delivering is intended to be X, Y, and Z. We don't have a sat phone. We don't have a, it's going to be Pony Express to get you out of there, or whatever it is, however you're going to respond. They need to understand that. Then the issue about emotionally stabilizing two groups. Those two distinct groups are what? Your employees and your staff, because they are going to be very, very affected by the fact that this is happening on their watch, and they're seeing somebody be harmed. And sometimes they are as likely to lose their cool as the person who is harmed. So, how is it that you're going to ascertain that whoever's in the field or whoever is responding to it is able to, bring back their own sense of calm, recover themselves? And then, what are you able to do for the person who is injured or dying or being extricated or whatever it is? And we miss this so often, and it seems like such severe training for people, but honestly, how many of you have 24, 25-year-old guys who are out there delivering products to 40, 50, 60-year-old people, right? And can they actually calm enough to instruct that person to calm down, right? This is worthwhile training to have. Obviously, contact your insurance company, do it very quickly. They may have some risk management advices that they can share with you. What I want your insurance company to do, if it's a critical, severe incident, is I want them, and this is what you need to ask for, I want them to authorize you to call counsel immediately on their dime or within your deductible level. But if it's a critical incident, we would like to send you a letter of attorney-client representation right away, so that whatever we find out or whatever we gather during this process of crisis and the investigation afterwards is protected by attorney-client privilege, okay? So if you're having a critical incident, you're in the middle of it, contact your insurance company, because you have timeliness requisites, because they may have risk management advices, and because we'd like to get some protection for whatever's going on right then and there. Now, if you have an injured person, do you have in your response plan, have you thought through the process of how are you going to coordinate with the parties' families? A lot of you are day trippers, so do you know where these people are from? Have you gathered that kind of information? Are they able to respond to you right then and there? There has to be some forethought to how do we get in contact with their family? Who can help us with them? That kind of thing. Law enforcement. So many of you are operating on public lands. You're holding permits from BLM, forest, state entities. You might have contracts with private landholders, whatever it is. And those people need to be kept in the loop pretty quick. Permitting agencies, that's what I was just kind of talking about. But if you're having an injurious episode, where you're going to be extricating by something like, helicopter, or you're going to use public transportation in a place that doesn't normally go, then your law enforcement officials also need to get involved. If you've got a dead body, your law enforcement officials have to be notified very quickly. You want them to respond. If there are other outfitters in the field, can they assist you with response? Can they come to the area? And this kind of contact should be happening at base of operations, but this thought process about who else is out there in the field who could either assist or who needs to be pulled back and not dropped into the middle of this crisis needs to be thought through. Then we think about what it is that we want you to collect. There are a lot of different things that we want you to be able to build a file with that is just for the incident. We want you to statementize people who were along on the incident, and that doesn't mean just your employees. We want you to get statements from the other participants. We want you to gather all of the release and waivers for anybody who was along on trips that day. If you know that they had no exposure to this other trip, fine, all right, that might be one thing. But if they were on the same bus, if they were in the same briefing, if they were in the same group, if they're departing the same area and they could have been exposed to any of this, we want to see their release and waiver documents, because we're looking to see who all potential witnesses are, people who might have heard things. We want to see your manifests, your trip manifests, who was assigned to, what boat, to what group, to whatever, right? You need to make it a policy or procedure that your guides and staff do not depart the premises that day until they have fully filled out the guide statements, witness statements. Now, I want you to have an eye also towards what it is they're writing. I mean, I have seen guide witness statements on people who are dead, who have 3 or 4 sentences. I mean, there's virtually nothing I can say to that, right? That's almost disrespectful. We want a cogent, what happened, what did you hear, no causation. This is what caused Mr. So-and-so. I sure am sorry we had this, accident. None of that stuff, just the facts, all of them, right? And it has to be a company policy or procedure that they don't leave until you get this. The farther away they get when they fill this stuff out, the less likely it is that that detail we're looking for is going to be there. If you're contacting law enforcement or public land administrators, they are going to generate all kinds of things. Their dispatcher is going to generate reports. Most of the states have laws about dispatchers being on radio and keeping public records of it. I want you to get the audios of it, because all kinds of crazy stuff comes out on those audios when those dispatchers are talking to your base of operations or talking to other law enforcement people. I mean, we may be listening to 4 hours of nothing, but then there it is. There's a nugget in there. Most of that stuff is kept. Photos, videotapes, did you shoot them? Did your client shoot them? When you statementize them, ask them if they've got anything on their digis right there that they can download, or anything that you can follow up with them on. If nobody's got photos of the scenes or the incident, can you get back out there and shoot that scene before it changes too much? And what I'm talking about is tomorrow the CFS is going to drop 100, or the snow is going to change, or whatever's going to happen. Can you get there pretty quickly and shoot some photos of the scenes and kind of document things? If there's actual pieces, actual stuff out there, there's a broken ski, there's a paddle, there's a whatever, get it, tag it, label it. Don't just grab it and throw it in the warehouse. Tag it, label it, what day, what incident, what client, mark it. Treat it with care. Again, the participant agreements, we're talking basically about release and waiver documents. Hopefully your well-drafted release and waiver document at the signature has an area where they have to fill out their name, address. Most of them have email contact anymore, telephone, that kind of stuff. If you don't have that in your release and waiver, please redraft, put it in there. That's where we get that kind of information. Media reports. This is getting to be so crazy because this isn't just whether it comes up in the newspaper. This is blogging, social media. You know, put your own company name after a critical incident on Google, on some of these different search engines, and find out what's being said about it and get copies of it. And when you get copies of it, make sure it has the date imprint on the bottom. You want to get that stuff gathered as much as possible. One of the reasons you also want to see what's going on, you know, e-discussions, blogging, things like that is, you want to see whether the participant or other witnesses are talking about it. And more scary to me are your employees talking about it, right? There are a couple of great river websites that people use around the country, and they're talking about all kinds of stuff, you know, who wants to go rafting, you know, what the rivers are doing, whether we're in early melt. And every time somebody is lost or there's an incident or accident or, oh, we're sure sorry that whatever happened, that information is on there. And if your employee is talking about it, you need to get that shut down ASAP. Okay, so what about other guests? The number one issue, of course, with dealing with other guests when you're post-incident is, what do you have to do to stabilize them? And that's two things in my mind, emotionally, physically. When they're sitting there watching a critical incident go down, I mean, people have very bad reactions to that. Anything from, I want to stick my 2 cents in there, to, oh my God, I am not getting back in the raft. What do you have to do to stabilize them emotionally and take care of them? And while this incident is stretching out, do we have physical needs for them? Is the rain coming in? Is it getting to be nighttime? Do we need food out here? Do we need additional guides out here? How are we going to affect all of that? And obviously, you want to try to produce those things, emotional and physical stability, without incurring additional risks. If you're in a place that, you know, means they literally have to get back in the raft and continue the trip before you can get to where you can pick them up, how can you do that, right? All of that has to be thought through. It is a remarkably difficult thing right now, how fast information goes out there. This idea of what I call streaming live 24/7, everybody's got a cell phone that shoots photos, right? You go into the camera store and you buy a really nice digi, they all have 3 or 4 uplinks on them. It's not, we're going to download your stuff when we go home to the hotel tonight. We're going to put it up right now. And it means we lose control of our situation pretty quickly anymore. And you can, with respect to your employees, the people that you pay, you can establish policies and procedures for your employees that are a term of employment as to how and when they can participate on social media with regard to your company. Frankly, if the guy wants to put in a cool photo of himself, you know, in his whole raft, you know, regalia or whatever, put something in your policies and procedures that says, if Doug says it's okay, right on, right? But you have to have authorization to use any insignia or equipment that belongs to the company, because they're putting your face out there in their, right, in their piece of the new space. You can't do that to clients. It's basically called First Amendment, right? You can't shut them down. However, I urge you to walk up to people when this is happening and say, come on, man, right? That might not be appropriate right now. You know, we have man down, we have some privacy issues, we've got more important things to, I mean, let's just talk real about this, right? You know you can't totally say no to them, but you have got to anymore think about, because remember, we're here for one reason. We're here to talk about things that produce additional liabilities for your company, all right? Now we got an injured guy who's having his incidents blasted all over, right? So we have some real tender issues with how rapidly information gets out. And because information gets out really rapidly, you have to think about the families of both the injured person and the non-injured person. If you're delayed 4 or 5 hours and they don't know why you're not coming out, or God forbid you're stuck, I don't know what, your heli doesn't come back or your whatever doesn't happen, how is it that you're going to communicate with these other people to get the lid on what otherwise becomes public panic? You have to think through how to communicate with people who are out there with you, because if you have 20 families knocking on your door trying to figure out what's going on and they don't get satisfaction, they're going directly to the media. Oftentimes if the authorities get involved, and by that I mean your public land administrator or law enforcement style authorities, they will request and sometimes demand that you provide information about everybody who's out there. So, you have to have a process back home at base of information or base of operations where they know who's out on that trip and they can rapidly respond to who's out there and what's going on. And frankly, sometimes the law enforcement people will take this out of your hands and they will endeavor to contact the people's families who are not out there. Sometimes they run really hard and say, no, this is my jurisdiction, and you get into a little bit of a problem there. But you need to have thought through, what are you going to do if you have to provide that information? There has to be obviously some coordination within your operation, again, about who does what. This guy is the first responder, this guy is going to go over there and get on the horn and talk to base. Base is actually calling the owners. Owners are the ones that are talking to, putting out the media template. Thought process, established thought process. And your employees, obviously this is part of employee training. What I always hear is, what we've always focused on are hard skills. We've never talked about this kind of stuff. Well, get David's DVD or whatever, but, do this topic with them. Run through how this is going to work. Run through some of these liability issues. And I really, really, really have to hit on this. The emotional response of your employees to critical incidents. These people are harmed by this kind of stuff. Nobody wants to have a critical incident on their watch. And when it happens, not even just for the legal sense, but for the moral sense, you need to pull them aside and figure out whether they need some kind of counseling, whether they need time off work, what it's going to take for them to pop that experience, right? Because if you sit there and watch them stuff it and you keep sending them back out in the field, boy, oh boy, that's just a really, really big issue. People carry this stuff around for a long time. We have to talk about something that is becoming a real issue in terms of defending the cases. And we're having a difficult time with it in terms of getting the judges to uphold our releases. And we're also having a difficult time with it in an evidentiary sense when the cases don't get dismissed on the release. And that is this. It's a timing issue. It's a purely timing issue. Administratively, what generally happens is they get to your office or they do their online reservations. Some of you are doing online reservations now, and you might, even click to do the releases anymore. So the contractual exculpatory document is generally signed before they get to you and listen to the safety briefing. So they are signing that they're waiving their rights before they've gotten a full education on what the risks are. The truth of the matter is, if they actually read these releases, particularly if they read the one that I drafted, they would know what the risks are. But you all know as well as I do that they get there and they're on vacation or they're day tripping or whatever and they're with their buddies and no matter how many times you tell them to read the release or you try to reinforce your release, the reality is very few people sit there and go, right? And so you know they're in a situation where they might not have absorbed all that. Now, what the law says is it doesn't matter whether you read a contract or not. If you're silly enough to sign a contract without reading it, you're still bound. I mean, whether it's your mortgage or your car loan or your release and waiver, you put your John Henry on the thing, you've agreed to be bound by the terms, unless they can show that I tricked you into signing it or something like that, right? So people don't avoid the exculpatory effect by not reading it, but what we are facing is the reality that they might not be fully apprised of all the risks. And when we get into litigation, that is almost 100% I will hear that claim. Well, I didn't really understand that when I signed the release. I signed the release when they took my credit card. And then I got out there on the river and this guy told me that I could drown doing this. So I get it. I know it's administratively difficult to have the releases come after the safety briefing. This issue about when the release and waiver is delivered in comparison or in conjunction or in timing with the safety briefing. You have to think through that yourself, how you can accomplish that. If you can't administratively create a situation where they can sign release and waiver documents subsequent to full oral warning or safety briefing, what are you doing to make sure that they understand that there are risks before they sign that release and waiver? And again, let's repeat some of the words. I mean, we now have linguistic, moderation in our vocabulary. And I know you don't want to use your wonderful, beautiful marketing to say difficult things about your trip. But if you know administratively that you are going to get them to sign a contract before they're fully warned, should you put a little something in there about, please be advised that there are inherent risks to all activities, and certainly there are to whitewater rafting or horseback riding or whatever it is. Can you put something in there on your website? Again, we touched upon this earlier. You all should be having a little warning in your marketing that says they have to follow your policies and procedures, they have to follow your guide instructions, and they will have to sign a release and waiver in favor of your company before they'll be allowed to participate. So, when you're doing your safety briefing, again, this is orientation of your clients. This is, trying to do things that minimize or mitigate your liability for what goes on out there. When you're doing your safety briefings, when you're orienting clients, have the equipment available that they're going to use. Have the, whatever it is, the paddles, the life jackets, the dry suits. Like if the guy's going to stand there and explain it, have him put it on, right? I mean, people really come back and say, I listened to the whole thing and the guy was kind of going along and then I got in the whatever it is and I really didn't know how to use that. So remind them. I mean, some of this seems so commonsensical, but again, people are on vacation, they're day tripping, they may or may not be paying attention to you. Take every opportunity to say things, even if it's obvious. Okay, we're going to get a little exercise out there today. You might have a sore back tomorrow. This is, we're going to expend some energy today. This is a little bit of a strenuous activity. I want you to let me know how it's going for you, right? Invite them to talk back to you, tell you what's going on for them so that you can respond. They have to be in full possession of their mental and physical capacities. Nobody's going on your trip if they're intoxicated or doing non-prescription drugs. If they're doing prescription drugs, you need to know, are they mind-altering or physically altering in any way? That statement has to be said, because if you ignore that and they endanger either your employees or other participants in addition to themselves, you can be liable for that. So let's talk a little bit about content of safety briefings. We're going to run through this. You should know all this stuff by now. The specifics of the activity. What area are you going to? What's the weather like today? What's to be expected out there? What are the inherent dangers? Are we seeing anything increase? Do we have high water today? Are the trails muddy today? Are we going slow for some particular reason? You know, are we potentially going to face a weather shutout halfway through? Tell them what's going to happen there. Proper equipment use. And remember something with this. Standing there giving one safety briefing, all well and good. Safety briefings between your guides and your clients don't end until they go their separate ways at the end of the day. You are essentially repeating your safety briefing information all day long, right? Warn them when they come back from the bathroom, warn them after lunch, talk to them about, you know, whatever's going to go on in the next set of rapids. Here's where we face the high side, here's what we were talking about. It's a constant walking through the entire